At 61, Ruth Mallory owned 2 trash bags of clothes, a motel key ring with no motel left on it, and a room behind her mother's garage she was no longer allowed to sleep in. Her sisters had sold the West Virginia house before the funeral flowers had fully browned, then told the realtor Ruth had already lived there long enough. As if 17 years of night pills, sponge baths, and 3A. breathing checks had been rent. When Ruth asked about the little strip of land behind the garage, Carolyn folded one blue-cornered paper into thirds and said, "That was never separate." So when Carolyn and Mavis pointed to the cracked switchboard their father once repaired for the old Hearthline Motor Lodge and said she could take that junk if she wanted something, Ruth took it because it smelled faintly of dust, hot wire, and the cigarette burns he used to leave on every wooden surface he touched. The thing was too heavy for her back, too broken to sell, and too useless to matter to anyone buying the house. But that night, in a rented storage shed with rain ticking against the tin roof, Ruth wiped one finger across the faded label for room 12, and a small yellow bulb blinked on. Not bright, not steady. Just once, like someone on the other end of a dead line was still waiting for her to answer. Ruth stood with the wet rag in her hand until the rain changed rhythm on the roof. The storage shed was Unit B19 behind a tire shop in Mercy Fork, West Virginia. $97 a month, no heat, one pull chain light that hummed in the cold. Her 2 trash bags sat beside a cardboard box of pill bottles she no longer needed to sort. The switchboard filled most of the floor. It had taken the neighbor's teenage grandson and a furniture dolly with one bad wheel to get it there. Carolyn had paid him $20 from their mother's change jar and said that made things even. Ruth crouched in front of the board again. Room 12. The label was yellowed, the corner curled up like a fingernail. The little bulb beneath it had gone dark, but the glass still held a faint warmth that did not belong in the shed. The cord lay curled on the concrete, frayed near the plug, not connected to anything. She pulled the motel key ring from her coat pocket. Dead brass tags, 3, 7, 9, 11, 14. Room 12 was missing. That was when she remembered Carolyn's hand on the paperwork that morning. Not the will, not the listing. The thin page with one torn blue corner that Carolyn had slid under a folder when Ruth looked too long. Ruth touched the empty space on the key ring. There had been a room 12 once. Her mother had stayed there during the 1977 flood, back when the house took water up to the baseboards and Wade Mallory opened Hearthline Motor Lodge to half the county. Carolyn always called that one of Mama's weather stories, but the bulb had blinked, and now the key was gone. Ruth turned off the pull chain light, sat in the dark beside the broken board, and kept her hand on the label for room 12 until her fingers went cold. If Ruth's story already feels familiar, subscribe to Legacy Drama Stories for more quiet stories of women who were dismissed and still endured. By morning, the shed smelled worse, wet concrete, old canvas, hot metal that should not have been hot. Ruth had slept in the Buick outside the shed, wrapped in her winter coat because the window leaked. The car had belonged to Nora. Carolyn had wanted to sell it too, until Ruth reminded her both names were on the title from the year she started driving Nora to dialysis. "That's not sentimental," Carolyn had said. "That's transportation." Ruth kept the car, then she drove to the one man in Merce Fork who might know why a dead motel board still had one room trying to speak. It was low and brick, with an aluminum awning over the door and 3 ceramic ducks in the flower bed, though the middle duck was a rabbit. Emmett had been the electrician for half the county before his knees went bad. He had once fixed the Hearthline sign after lightning burned out the H, so it read Earthline for 6 weeks. He opened the door in suspenders and a thermal shirt. Behind him, the kitchen smelled of burned coffee and motor oil. "Ruthie Mallory," he said. "No one calls me that anymore." "I just did." The switchboard was too heavy to move from the storage shed, so Ruth brought photographs. She had taken them with her phone, close-ups of the room 12 bulb, the cord, the cracked back panel, the labels. Emmett put on reading glasses held together with electrical tape and studied the pictures at his kitchen table. The table had a plastic cloth printed with lemons. One corner had melted into a brown crescent, probably from a pot set down too hot. An orange prescription bottle lay on its side beside a screwdriver with a yellow handle. Emmett stopped at the picture of the back panel. Wade did that. Ruth leaned forward. Did what? That brace. He tapped the phone screen with one thick finger. See those screws? Not factory. Your daddy used brass when everybody else used whatever was in the coffee can. It blinked, Ruth said. Emmett looked up. The room 12 light. Last night, it came on once. The board wasn't plugged in. He took his glasses off, wiped them on his shirt, put them back on. Outside, a crow landed on the mailbox, then hopped off as if the mailbox had disappointed it. Could be static. Could be damp in the contacts. Could be. He looked at the photo again. Then he said, "Your father didn't waste wire." They went to the storage shed in Emmett's old Ford wagon, wood paneling peeling at the edges. Ruth followed in the Buick because she did not like leaving herself without a way to go. Inside Unit B19, Emmett stood over the switchboard without touching it. "Hearthline," he said. "Do you remember it? I remember the coffee being terrible." He knelt with difficulty and opened his tool bag. 2 screws turned, 4 did not. The last had rusted into something like a coin. Ruth held the flashlight until her arm trembled. After nearly an hour, the panel loosened with a dry crack. Inside was not empty. Behind the rows of wires and sockets, Wade Mallory had built a narrow shelf from scrap wood. On it sat a small cassette recorder wrapped in a stiff dish rag, and beside it 3 tapes held together with a rubber band partly melted into the plastic. The top tape had Wade's handwriting on it. March 1977, 12 Nora. Ruth read it twice. Emmett looked at the tape. "Flood year," he said. "My mother stayed in room 12. He turned the cassette over, thumb pausing on Nora's name. Maybe she asked him to. The first player they tried ate the tape, not all of it. Just enough to make Emmett curse under his breath and unplug the machine. The tape spilled out like thin brown ribbon. For 1 second, Ruth saw Carolyn's face if she told her. That patient correction. The look that said Ruth always made objects heavier than they were. Then Ruth reached for a pencil. "What do I do?" "Don't touch the shiny side." They spent the afternoon repairing what the player had chewed. Emmett slit the cassette open with a jeweler's screwdriver. Ruth held the 2 halves flat so the reels would not jump. Her fingers smelled of old plastic and coffee. "Easy," he said. "I am easier than that." The words stayed in the cold shed. Ruth had spent 17 years being told she made things difficult by insisting they had edges. Pills, shower chairs, breathing checks, dates on forms. Mavis called that period Mama's hard time. Carolyn called it when Ruth took over. Ruth called it Tuesday. At 4:25, the tape was repaired enough to try on Emmett's better deck at his house. He drove it there on the passenger seat of the wagon as if it were a pie no one wanted dropped. Ruth followed, windshield wipers squeaking over glass that was already dry. The better deck sat in Emmett's back room among radios, busted lamps, and 3 fans without cages. A mounted fish hung crooked over the doorway, though Emmett had never fished, as far as Ruth knew. He cleaned the heads with alcohol, let it dry, inserted the tape. At first there was only hiss, then rain, hard rain. Not the soft tick on the shed roof, but water beating flat against glass, water running in gutters, water with weight behind it. A clatter came next, someone moving something metal. Wade's voice, younger and close to the microphone, said, "Lines open, then Nora, not old, not thin, not confused. Wade, write this down." Ruth's hand found the back of a chair. The chair had a cracked vinyl seat repaired with gray tape. Her thumb settled on the seam. The tape popped, dragged, caught again. Nora's voice came through in pieces. Room 12. If the creek keeps rising, Ruth knows where everything is. Not Carolyn, not Mavis. If Ruth's story already feels familiar, subscribe to Legacy Drama Stories for more quiet stories of women who were dismissed and still endured. Emmett reached to adjust the knob. Ruth caught his wrist without meaning to. "Don't," he stopped. The tape hissed. Another voice appeared, male, farther from the recorder. "Nora, this won't be formal unless Leland files it." "I know what formal means," Nora said. A glass touched something. Thunder rolled so long it sounded like furniture being moved upstairs. Nora said the back parcel, the garage room, the strip to the alley. "Wade, you hear me? I hear you. If I get sick before we do it, you make sure Ruth has that place. She'll keep it standing. The others will sell whatever stands still." The tape warped there, bending her voice into a low moan. Then it snapped back. "Leland has the survey, blue copy, in his drawer." Emmett stopped the tape with one finger. Silence came down fast. A clock in the back room ticked too loudly. Somewhere in the kitchen, his refrigerator knocked twice and settled. Ruth let go of the chair. The gray tape on the seat had left a sticky square on her thumb. She remembered, Ruth said. Emmett did not ask what, she knew. He looked at the cassette deck. "That tape isn't enough by itself. I know, it helps." Ruth nodded. Her eyes moved to the window. On the sill sat a plastic Easter egg, pink and unopened. It was March, but not Easter yet. It looked as if a child had hidden it years too late. She put the cassette back in its case and closed it carefully. The next morning, Carolyn was at the house with the realtor. Ruth saw the white sedan in the driveway and the polished brown shoes before she saw her sisters. The for sale sign had been straightened. A red Soldier Rider leaned against the porch, not yet attached. Carolyn stood at the kitchen island, sorting papers into 3 piles. Mavis was wrapping coffee mugs in newspaper, though nobody had asked her to. "I need the files from the hall cabinet," Ruth said. Carolyn did not look up. "Which files?" "House papers. Anything with the garage. The lawyer has what matters." On the island, beneath Carolyn's left hand, was a photocopy with a torn upper corner and a line of blue ink along one edge. Ruth looked at it long enough for Carolyn to slide another paper over the top. "The buyer wants the property clear by Friday," Carolyn said, "including the garage room. My things are out, the built-ins, the old shelf, that cot stain on the floor. Mavis said they may tear it down anyway." Ruth turned toward her. "Who said that?" Mavis's mouth tightened. "It's not a real room." In the dining room, the realtor laughed into his phone. The sound bounced strangely off the empty walls. Ruth went to the hall cabinet. Carolyn moved faster. "No." Ruth stopped with her hand on the brass knob. Carolyn said, "You lived here free for 17 years." Ruth opened the cabinet anyway. There were no house files inside. Only napkins from Nora's 80th birthday, 3 dead batteries, a thermometer, and a church directory from 2014 with the wrong pastor circled. On her way out, Ruth passed the garage room. The mattress was gone. The little lamp was gone. The oxygen tubing still hung over the nail, a clear loop catching morning light. She took it down, coiled it once around her hand, and put it in her coat pocket. At the county records office, the heat was too high. Ruth sat at a public computer that clicked every time she moved the mouse. The records clerk, Mrs. Danner, wore cat eye glasses and a cardigan with tiny embroidered strawberries, though it was still cold outside. "I want anything that mentions the rear garage," Ruth said, "or a separate parcel." Mrs. Danner typed with 2 fingers, "Survey, maybe from 1989. The clerk's fingers stopped. "That's before the digital conversion." They went to the back room, where paper records lived in tall metal cabinets, and the air smelled like old envelopes and floor wax. Mrs. Danner pulled books. Ruth lifted them because the clerk's wrist had a bruise. They found the 1989 deed after 40 minutes. It named Wade and Nora Mallory. described the main lot, the alley easement, and then referenced rear structure and associated strip as shown on survey. "Where's the survey?" Ruth asked. Mrs. Danner tapped the page. "Not recorded here. Could it stop a sale? I'm not a lawyer, I know, but a title company hates an unanswered question." Ruth copied the deed. The machine jammed once. Mrs. Danner placed the copies in a manila folder and wrote the book and page numbers on the front. "Missing pages don't vanish by themselves," she said. Ruth looked at her. "That's not legal advice," Mrs. Danner added. "No, it's a sentence." By the time Carolyn called that evening, Ruth was sitting in the Buick outside Emmett's house with the engine off. "You went to records," Carolyn said. "Yes, you're embarrassing us. I found a deed reference. You found words you don't understand. Mavis is crying." Ruth closed her eyes. She had heard that one all her life. Mavis crying was a weather system everyone else was expected to prepare for. Carolyn's voice lowered. "The buyers are good people. Their lender's doing the final walkthrough Monday. After that, anything still on the property gets cleared." "Abandoned items, Ruth. The switchboard isn't there." "The room is," Carolyn said. "So is the problem. A moth tapped Emmett's porch light, soft and stupid, trying the same wrong light." "Don't make us lose this sale over a shed," Carolyn said. Then, lower, "You stayed because you had nowhere else. Don't make that into sainthood." Ruth said, "Good night, Carolyn." Her sister was still speaking when Ruth ended the call. Emmett had the tape ready again. He had made a digital copy on an old laptop that took 11 minutes to start and made a sound like bees trapped in a jar. The file sat on the desktop, labeled Nora Room 12, Wave. Seeing her mother's name turned into computer text made Ruth want to touch the screen, but she did not. They listened to the tape in full. There was more than the first fragment. There was Wade asking, "You sure you want Ruth named separate?" Nora's voice, "She won't ask. That's why." There was the other man, Leland, the lawyer, coughing into his hand and saying he could draft a deed after the roads opened if Nora came by the office. "There may be tax consequences," he said. Nora laughed once, sharp and tired. "Everything has consequences." A wrong sound came next, a child's cartoon theme faintly in the background. Ruth did not know who had left a television on during a flood. Then Nora said something that made Ruth look down at her own hands. "Carolyn wants clean things. Mavis wants easy things. Ruth keeps broken things working." Emmett stopped the recording. Ruth was glad he did. The window over his workbench had gone black with evening. Her reflection hovered there, older than she expected, hair pinned badly, mouth set the way Nora's had set when the pharmacy put the wrong label on the bottle. Emmett cleared his throat. "Leland had a daughter." Ruth looked over. "June, married name Pike. Runs a title office in Preston County now. If the blue survey copy exists, she might know where his old files went." "You think she'd talk to me? She'll talk to the tape." It took Ruth 2 days to call June Pike. Not because she lacked the number. Emmett found it on a business card stuck behind a magnet on his refrigerator. June Leland Pike, Pike Title and Settlement. A coffee stain crossed the fax number. In that time, Carolyn had the garage locks changed. Ruth found out when she went to retrieve Nora's recipe tin. Her old key entered the knob but would not turn. A new silver deadbolt sat above it, too bright against the weathered door. A white notice had been taped below the knob. Property to be cleared prior to closing. Someone had underlined prior twice in blue pen. Ruth stood there with the key in her hand. Behind the door were the shelf Wade had built, the floor stain from her cot, the nail where Nora's oxygen tubing had hung. None of it looked like property when you had lived beside it long enough. It looked like proof. She did not knock on the main house door. She went back to the storage shed and opened the switchboard. Not because there was more to find, because there was work to do. She cleaned the brass jacks with vinegar and a cheap toothbrush until the Room 12 label lay flat again. Her fingers stiffened. Her back hurt. At one point, she dropped a brass plug and had to lie flat on the concrete to reach it. By the end of the afternoon, the switchboard looked no newer, but room 12's bulb sat clean in its socket. Ruth called June Pike at 5:13. "This is Pike Title," a woman said. Ruth gave her name. Explained the 1989 deed, Leland, the tape, and the blue survey copy. There was silence. Papers moved. "I don't open dead clients' files for strangers," June said. "I'm not a stranger to the tape." More silence. Then quieter. "My father kept everything. Does that mean yes? It means I have a storage room that should be condemned, and I haven't decided if I'm doing this for you or for him. I can come tomorrow." Another silence. Then June said, "Bring the tape." The next morning was clear and mean. Ruth drove to Preston County with both hands on the wheel. Emmett came along with a thermos and 2 ham biscuits wrapped in foil. "You drive too slow," he said, getting into the passenger seat. "Then suffer." Pike Title and Settlement occupied the second floor above a dentist's office in a brick building that smelled of wintergreen and old carpet. June Pike was 69, narrow-shouldered, with silver hair cut blunt at her chin. One shoelace was red, the other white. Ruth placed the cassette, the digital copy, and the county records on the conference table. June read the deed twice. "My father had a drawer. The blue copy?" Ruth asked. "He had many blue copies." June led them to the storage room. Banker boxes leaned in columns. Rolled surveys filled cardboard tubes. A small artificial poinsettia lay crushed under one box, red leaves flattened like dried peppers. They searched for 2 hours. June pulled Mallory files from one cabinet, then another. Emmett opened tubes. Ruth carried boxes to the conference table and back until her palms blackened with dust. At 12:36, June found it. Mallory, rear parcel 1989. Inside was a blue survey copy, a draft deed, 2 letters from Leland to Wade Mallory, and a sticky note so old the glue had given up. One word remained. File. The survey showed the main house lot. Behind it, outlined separately in blue pencil, was the garage structure, the room attached behind it, and a narrow strip of land to the alley. The legal description had been written in Leland's hand. June read the draft deed slowly. "It wasn't recorded," she said. "Why not?" June turned one of the letters around. Wade had died before the final appointment. Nora had delayed. Then, years later, the early medical notes began. Memory concerns, confusion with dates, difficulty signing checks. June placed Leland's letter beside the tape. "This doesn't give you the parcel automatically," she said, "but it creates a serious title question, especially if your mother's intent predates the competency concerns. What does fixed mean? A quiet title action, or a corrective deed if all parties sign?" Ruth folded her hands so the paper cut would stop bleeding on the table. June looked at her differently then. "Not soft, exact. Do you have somewhere to stay?" "I have a storage unit. That's not what I asked." Noba June wrote down 2 names, legal aid. "Real estate clinic. Call both. Tell them there is a pending sale and a title defect." Then she added, "Do not sign anything your sisters bring you." The diner Carolyn chose was called the Copper Skillet, though the skillets on the wall were black iron and dusty. Ruth arrived early and sat facing the door because old habits did not retire when you did. The booth vinyl was split, and yellow foam showed through like old cake. A waitress filled her coffee without asking and set down 2 creamers, one already leaking from the seam. Carolyn and Mavis came in together. Carolyn wore a camel coat and carried a manila envelope. Mavis had brought a Tupperware container with no lid, holding nothing. She set it on the table beside the sugar packets and seemed surprised to find it empty. "You got June Pike involved," Carolyn said. Ruth looked at the envelope. "You changed the locks. The house is under contract. The garage room is part of the question." Carolyn's jaw moved once. Mavis said, "This is hurting everyone." Ruth stirred her coffee, though she had not added sugar. Carolyn opened the envelope and removed a cashier's check. She placed it face up on the table. Nines and $700, not enough to change a life. Enough to make a tired woman stop fighting for one. Enough for a deposit. First month. Maybe most of a year in a trailer if Ruth found one with bad carpet, soft floors, and a landlord who did not ask too many questions. Enough to stop sleeping in the Buick when the March nights dropped below freezing. Enough to make surrender look almost practical. You sign a quitclaim, Carolyn said. We close. You move on. Mavis looked at the check and then at the window. Carolyn took a folded paper from the envelope and placed it beside the check. It was not from a court. Not officially. Just a letter from the estate attorney printed on cream paper heavy enough to make fear feel expensive. If this sale falls through because of your claim, Carolyn said, the estate may seek costs from your share. I don't have a share. You might have a debt. Mavis pushed the empty container an inch to the left. Ruth looked at the check. The waitress dropped a fork at another table. It rang against tile. Carolyn softened her voice. Ruth, be practical. The check sat between them, clean and flat. The letter curled slightly at one corner where Carolyn's thumbs had pressed too hard. The word practical had followed Ruth through her life like a neighbor's dog. Be practical. Don't go to community college. Mama's needs help. Be practical. Take night shifts. Days are for appointments. Be practical. Don't ask for wages from family. Be practical. Don't make grief expensive. What did you do with the blue paper? Ruth asked. Carolyn's face did not change fast enough. What blue paper? The survey. Mavis looked at Carolyn. Carolyn turned the check so it faced Ruth more directly. This is more than fair. You knew there was a separate parcel. We knew Daddy talked about things. Daddy talked about buying a boat too. We live in West Virginia. That's my point. It was almost funny. Ruth looked down until the almost passed. Carolyn said, Mama was not in her right mind near the end. The tape is from 1977. Mama also said she wanted to learn French in 1977. Ruth folded the check once, not sharply. Just enough to crease it, then she slid it back. Carolyn stared at the fold as if Ruth had cut something living. Mavis whispered, Where will you go? Ruth stood. She had no answer, so she left the question there with the leaking creamer and the empty Tupperware. If this story is you hear, leave a comment for the women who kept broken things working while everyone else called them useless. The legal aid office was in a converted house near the courthouse, with a waiting room that smelled of copier toner and wet wool. Alyssa Grant listened to the tape with headphones. She did not interrupt. Once she rewound Nora saying, Ruth keeps broken things working, but she did not comment on it. Then she examined June's copies, the 1989 deed reference, the blue survey, the draft deed, Nora's medical timeline, and the purchase contract. This is messy, Alyssa said. Ruth looked at her hands. Messy isn't bad. Messy means there's something to argue. I don't want to argue. You may not have to. The title insurer won't like this, neither will the buyer's lender. What happens now? We notify the closing attorney. We ask for a pause pending review. Then we either negotiate a corrective deed or file quiet title, notice. Claim, pause, review. They were not warm words, but they had handles. Alyssa gathered the documents. You understand this may not give you the main house. I don't want the main house. Good, because that would be harder. I want the room. Alyssa looked up. Ruth corrected herself. I want what was meant. That Friday the sale did not close. The Monday clearing order was put on hold with it. Ruth was not there when the closing attorney called Carolyn. She was at the storage shed, replacing the room 12 bulb with one Emmett had found in a drawer labeled Odd Little Bastards. She only knew because Alyssa called at 3:08. The title company has paused closing pending resolution, she said. Ruth was sitting on the concrete floor with a screwdriver in her lap. For how long? Long enough. Ruth ended the call and set the phone face down on the cot. They did not celebrate. The switchboard still needed safe power if the bulb was to light without burning the shed down. Emmett installed a small transformer and a modern plug. Ruth held screws in her palm, bright new metal beside old brass. At 5:22, he plugged it in. Nothing happened. At 5:41, after one tightened screw and several things muttered under his breath, the little yellow bulb came on. Steady this time. The quiet title action took 4 months. Ruth learned the weight of process one counter at a time. At the post office, she paid $8.73 for certified mail and watched the clerk stamp the receipt so hard the ink bled through to her thumb. At the courthouse, the copy machine jammed on Nora's medical timeline and tore one page across the word competency. Alyssa taped it from the back and told Ruth not to read meaning into office equipment. There were copies stamped received in blue ink, Wade's death certificate, Leland's letters, June Pike's affidavit explaining where the blue survey had been kept, Nora's records requested, delayed, released, and partly blacked out. Justice, Ruth learned, did not sound like a gavel. It sounded like a copier jamming and a woman behind glass saying, "Next." She slept those months in a rented room above Mrs. Danner's cousin's bakery for $375 a month cash. It smelled like yeast in the morning and onions after lunch because the bakery made pepperoni rolls. The radiator clanked at 2 a.m. like someone knocking from inside the wall. She worked part-time at the laundromat on Route 22, closing shift, wiping lint from dryers and counting quarters into paper sleeves. Carolyn did not call. Mavis sent one text in May, "I hope you're happy now." Ruth did not answer because the phone had changed happy to happening, and for some reason that made the whole thing too sad to touch. In June, the buyer withdrew. In July, Carolyn and Mavis agreed through counsel to a corrective deed, recognizing Ruth's separate interest in the rear parcel rather than pay for a longer fight. The main house would be relisted without the garage room and alley strip. The price dropped, not ruinously, enough to sting. Ruth was not present when they signed. Alyssa called afterward. "It's recorded," she said. Ruth was at the laundromat cleaning melted crayon from inside dryer number 6 with a plastic scraper. Red wax had smeared across the drum like lipstick. "What is?" Ruth asked, though she knew. "The corrective deed. The rear parcel is yours." The laundromat kept tumbling around her. Jeans, towels, work shirts with reflective stripes flashing in the round window. Ruth leaned one hand against the dryer. "Ruth, I'm here. You'll get the certified copy in the mail." After the call, Ruth finished scraping the crayon. It took another 14 minutes. The red never came all the way off. The house sold in August. A young couple bought it. They painted the front door dark blue and asked Ruth politely where the property line ran. She showed them the survey with the blue pencil now copied in black. The garage room remained. It was smaller than Ruth remembered when she moved back in. The floor still held the faint rectangle where the cot had been. The shelf above the sink sagged to the left. One pane in the window had a crack running upward like a creek on a map. Emmett helped install a safer outlet. Mrs. Danner brought a box of mismatched dishes from her church basement. June Pike mailed the certified copy with a sticky note that said, "Keep this somewhere dry." Alyssa sent nothing but the final bill, marked paid through a small legal aid grant Ruth had not known she qualified for. Mavis drove by once in September but did not stop. Ruth was inside, lining the shelf with paper cut from old grocery bags. She heard the car slow, heard it move on. She kept smoothing the paper until the wrinkle near the edge lay flat. Carolyn never came. No one apologized. The county records did not require anyone's regret. The deed sat in a fireproof box under Ruth's bed, legal-sized, certified, and plain. By October, the nights cooled. Ruth put the switchboard against the wall near the small kitchen table. It took 3 tries to find the right angle because the floor dipped. Emmett had wired only one lamp to work, the little yellow bulb beneath room 12. The rest stayed dark. On her first full night back, Ruth made coffee in a dented aluminum pot Wade had once used at the motel. Rain began after 9, light at first, then steady on the garage roof. The sound was almost the same as it had been in the storage shed. On the table lay the motel key ring, dead brass tags, 3, 7, 9, 11, 14. The empty gap where 12 should have been. Ruth turned off the overhead light. The room fell into shadow except for the switchboard. Room 12 glowed softly, not bright enough to read by, just enough to mark the wall and the table and the edge of the certified deed box under her bed. The cot was gone. In its place stood a narrow bed Ruth bought used from a woman in Fairmont for $40 and a jar of peach preserves. Outside the new family's porch light went off in the main house. Ruth did not look toward it. She checked the lock on her own door, new brass. 2 keys. One on the ring in her pocket, one in the fireproof box beneath the bed. The bolt slid cleanly. Then Ruth set her mug on the table. She crossed the room slower than she meant to, the floor cold through her socks, and turned the key from the inside.